What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto was sent on a mission to seduce the enemy village leader's daughter? If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. What do you think the case cage is like in bed, Shika-kun? She just interrupted Shikamaru too. He was giving his Hokage every last bit of information he could from his goodwill mission to Suna. He was beginning to think Naruto had drawn straws with his assistant. How else would he have been given the job as ambassador between their villages when he had a team of his own now? Hanabi Hyuga looked up at Shikamaru expectantly. In his musings, he hadn't answered her question. He just shook his head and sighed. Troublesome. Hanabi scoffed. It was just a question. Yeah, Shika-kun. Naruto Uzumaki chimed in. What's he like? Shikamaru sighed. Enough jokes, Hokage-sama. Hanabi shook herself. She would just have to find someone who knew the answer later. Her curiosity could wait. He's right. She shifted the papers in front of her. We're supposed to be deciding who to give this mission to. I wouldn't have taken you for a fangirl, Hanabi-chan, Naruto cooed. She ignored him. What are the requirements, Hokage-sama? Naruto groaned, gazing down at the papers in front of him, as he chewed on the end of his pen. Damn that Hanabi and her ability to distract him with work. She'll have to be closer to Gaara's age. The case cage doesn't trust people too young or too old. Hanabi scoffed at that. Weird. Naruto smiled slightly. Well, Gaara's been betrayed by many people, but since becoming case cage, none have been in his age bracket. Shikamaru just confirmed that Gaara's easily annoyed by old bats and young brats. Hanabi smiled back. Okay, what else? The Hokage returned to the list. Anyone from a shinobi clan is out of the question. He'll spot things like the distinctive marks of the Hyuga, the Inuzuka, or the Akamichi, and he's got a great sense of familiarity with members of the Yamanaka thanks to Ino's crush on his older brother. A civilian-born ninja then? And I definitely want a kunoichi. Huh? Hanabi frowned. The case cage gets fangirls Naruto-sama, so a girl would. It's perfect, Naruto said dismissively. A civilian girl who doesn't fawn over him, he won't know what hit him. Or he'll get suspicious and spend most of the time trying to figure the girl out, ruining all chances for her to gain his trust. Cynic. I prefer to think of it as realistic. Naruto blew a raspberry at her. Hanabi rolled her eyes. We're deciding on which kunoichi to send to Suna to trick the case cage and potentially get herself killed over it, so take this seriously, would you? I need a new assistant, Naruto mumbled. I heard that. The Hokage sighed. There isn't anything you don't hear, is there? You remember what my father told you? The blonde nodded, growling softly. I remember. Hiashi Hyuga is a devious snake, blackmailing me like that. Don't you want to marry my Aneki? Naruto groaned. Of course, I do. But the Hokage is not supposed to be blackmailed, Hanabi. It's not blackmail, Hanabi said, suppressing her desire to laugh at him. He was acting like a child. It's a verbal agreement. You start acting like the Hokage and he'll stop pestering you to put off your engagement to Hinata. Very fair, I think. Clan members. Naruto sighed, frustrated. He wished Hiashi would lighten up, that Hanabi would stop reminding him how important appearances were when it came to the Hyuga, and that Hinata hadn't been born into a clan. He loved her more than anyone, and probably more than he loved the village. Though that was never something he could admit, being the sixth Hokage. And he would vehemently deny it if it ever came up. He frowned at his future sister-in-law. I've already decided on someone I trust, someone close to me, who won't make fun of me, or… Oh no, Hanabi whined, burying her face in her hands. You didn't? Not yet, Naruto admitted. But just think about it. Sakura-chan would be perfect. The Hyuga shook her head, still hiding her face. You are such a bad Hokage. I'm not. R2. I'm not. Hanabi groaned, looking up at him. I'm not playing that game with you again. Naruto smiled sheepishly. Fine, but I'm still sending Sakura-chan. Hanabi grumbled. And how do you expect to convince her? You know if she doesn't like the mission, she won't take it, she never does. I know that. I'm going to make it sound good. She scoffed. You've run out of bribery tactics with her. What are you going to offer this time? A sly grin twisted his features and Naruto gave a soft cackle. Oh, you'll see, she sighed. Why did I agree to this job? Seriously, she should have just told her father she was too busy. Or run away from home, whatever. The Hokage gave a non-committal shrug of his shoulders and shunshined out. His assistant quickly stalked out after him. Shikamaru remained standing, gaping at the now vacant chair behind the Hokage's desk, frustrated in the wake of their departure. Naruto had forgotten to dismiss him, again. Are you kidding me? No. You want me to? Yep. And, Naruto, I don't know. You'll enjoy it. What? Seducing the cage? Naruto nodded his head, a light pink tinting his cheeks. He managed to hold back the maniacal grin that was attempting to force its way onto his face. His acting skills were getting better and better under Hanabi's tutelage. She wasn't just his assistant to help him with paperwork, after all. He sucked at being diplomatic. Sakura Haruno groaned. Kakashi Hitaki stood to the side and behind Naruto, the usual position for Hanabi. The copy ninja was looking at Sakura passively, but having known him for years, she could see the infinitesimal hint at pity. She scrunched up her nose at him and he smirked, the bastard. What does he know that I don't? Sakura-chan? Naruto asked, unnerved as he always was by her silence. Can you? I'm not an Anbu Naruto, she said haughtily. If they weren't best friends, she wouldn't be talking to him like this. And as a result, I wouldn't know the first thing about how to seduce a political figure. The blonde cleared his throat, that slight shade of pink on his cheeks now reddening. Why you use your womanly wiles, Sax. She snorted as Kakashi chuckled. The copy ninja decided to put her out of her misery. You don't have to sleep with him, Sakura, just hold that in reserve. Yeah, Sakura-chan, Naruto said, perking up. There's always an opening in the cage building for a receptionist, and you're good at that stuff. Sakura allowed a small smile to grace her features. And am I to go in alone? Naruto shook his head. No, he said, noting the way the pinkette's eyes drifted over to their former sensei. Kakashi isn't going with you. He's too conspicuous, what with that eye and his porn-reading habits. Romance, Kakashi countered. Dirty romance, the Hokage said, pulling a face when his former sensei sighed deeply. My point is Sakura. I'm sending someone with you. Someone who can pass as father figure. Someone nondescript. Who? Yamato. Tenzo, Sakura corrected. Naruto shrugged. I like Yamato better. But he's younger than even Kakashi, Sakura said. A brother then, Kakashi said. I'll go fetch him. He shunshined out and Sakura rubbed her chin thoughtfully. There's a flaw with your oh-so-Hokage logic, Naruto. I've met Gaara, don't forget it was just the one time, and when I was 13, but he'll remember me for my hair if nothing else. Naruto waved away her concern. Semantics. She narrowed her eyes at him. What are you up to? Nothing, he said. Don't accuse your Hokage of naughty things, Sakura. She smiled at that. Sure, then don't do them, Naruto. Okay, he said happily, and she frowned at him, worried again. Seriously, Naruto, you're freaking me out. What aren't you telling me? Nothing. Sakura frowned. Like I believe you. Do you even know what I'll be walking into? We have intelligence, Naruto said defensively. Gaara is not currently involved with anyone, or at least, not officially. Shikamaru has confirmed this much, directly from Temari, and that woman knows everything. Everything? Naruto nodded. And apparently, the cage prefers women with more spirit. You'll catch his eye in no time. She scoffed again. She had once made the mistake of telling Naruto she thought the cage was cute, so he obviously thought that would make her jump at the chance of seducing him. But if she could avoid sleeping with him, shouldn't she? She hadn't been joking when she said she had no idea how to do that. She'd had a few lovers, but she was never the one in control. Still, Gaara Sabaku struck her as the dominant type. Sakura blushed at that thought, occupying the silence as they waited for Kakashi and Tenzo with picking at her fingernails. There were more than so-called semantics to work out if Naruto wanted this mission to be a success. She had to worm her way into a position to either confirm or deny the rumors of the redhead's intent, and while she was good at subterfuge, doing so under the watchful eyes of a cage made her more nervous than the possibility of having to sleep with him, sort of. If it was anyone other than the Wind Shadow, she'd have already hit Naruto and stormed out of the building the moment the knucklehead suggested it. Still, the idea had merit. The two former Anbu arrived quickly, and Naruto sat up straight in his chair, like he thought pretending to be taking this seriously would make them respect him more. Yamato, he said dryly. Thanks for coming. After Naruto explained the mission, albeit vaguely, the Wood Master nodded compliantly. The Hokage always lamented on how difficult Sakura was to convince of these things. But then, Tenzo wasn't the one taking the real risks on this one. The man's eyes flickered curiously over to Sakura before settling on the Hokage. When are we to be ready? Once I have the plans for Suna's administration building, I'll schedule your mission briefing, and you should be able to leave in a few days. Sakura pulled a face. Fine, but you're telling me everything, and no half-handed excuses this time, okay? I'm not going into this blind, baka. Don't worry Sakura-chan, Naruto said. He loves mysterious women. The pinkette gave him a wry smile that hinted at her desire to pummel him and followed Tenzo out of the room. Kakashi frowned at his Hokage. You just made that up. Naruto grinned mischievously. She's going to be pissed with you when she finally figures out you're not being completely honest with her. The blonde shrugged his shoulders. I'm the Hokage. What can she do? The memorial stone was as it always was. Another fine example of what happened to those who chose the life of a ninja. It was heartwarming, depressing and a kick in the stomach, all rolled into one. She honestly didn't know why she kept coming back here. The surrounding trees were never overrun, the grass never long and the stone cenotaph never dirty. It rained here too much for that anyway. And Sakura Haruno loved the rain. Running her gloved finger over the most recent name on the memorial stone, she vaguely wondered if her name would one day be carved in next to it, and how much longer she had to wait for that to happen. Depressing thoughts. She shook her head and drew back her hand. The name on the cenotaph was just another reminder that she had to be positive. After all, she really was sick of it, waiting, hoping, and needing what was never going to happen. Her teammate wasn't coming back, and she needed to move on. If such a thing was possible. But he plagued her mind, nonetheless. She had avoided seeing him for so long, and when they finally ran into each other, she was left with nothing but regret. Really, what did one say to another after they attempted to murder you? That he hadn't been on some killing spree, simply doing what he thought was best for his mission. Or that somewhere deep inside of him at the time, she was sure he'd never really been looking to kill her. Sakura growled, kicking the tuft of grass in front of her, promptly unearthing a clump of roots. Crap, watch what you're doing, ugly. If she hadn't been so far gone into her depressed thoughts, Sakura would have laughed out loud. His sudden appearance didn't startle her. More than Naruto, Kakashi, or Tenzo, Sai had a way of making her feel better. He still thought up some colorful excuses why she should be grateful he let himself be seen in public with her, but it was oddly comforting. Stand in front of me next time, she said, as he stepped up next to her. Then at least I'll have a target. His soft smile returned hers. She was grateful that since Danzu's death, and the removal of that damn seal, he'd found it so much easier to bring a genuine one to his face. Are you saying goodbye before your mission? She nodded, gripping his arm. I think it would be good to get out of the village for a while anyway. Everyone keeps looking at me like I'm some degenerate for turning down the most recent marriage proposal. He shook his head. I still don't know why they keep coming after you. I'm popular, okay, that's why. But the last thing I need right now is some overbearing clan leader thinking it's my civic duty to marry into his clan. It was bad enough when the Inuzuka was prowling after me. And the Hyuga, he said sagely. She rolled her eyes. I do not need reminding of that. Hiyashi Hyuga had tried to get her engaged to his nephew. Sai was currently engaging in what he called carnal bliss with Hanabi. Hiyashi was getting the Hokage and apparently, Sakura would complete the set. Like she was some kind of collectible. But while Sakura and Neji got along well enough, neither had feelings for the other, and Hiyashi got the hint, eventually. Neji's very public proposal to Tenten definitely helped. Sakura giggled, remembering how Tenten had hidden away for days after that. Who knew the Neji Hyuga had a thing for serenades? Everyone but me knows where they're going, she said, after a few minutes of silence. Do I? She nodded. Yeah, even you. Where am I going, Sakura? She eyed him warily. Your relationship with Hanabi hasn't progressed out of the physical stage? He shrugged. You don't want something more? I'm ex-rude, so it's not easy. Sakura's eyes flickered over the name on the memorial stone again. I wish things were different. He's not coming back. I know that, she growled. Sai ignored her tone. I think this is unhealthy. Kakashi-senpai is rubbing off on you. She leant into him and for once, Sai embraced her. A one-armed embrace, but an embrace nonetheless. She rolled her eyes. "You're here too," she pointed out. He just shrugged. Tomorrow, she'd be leaving for who knew how long, and it was with this thought that Sakura realized something. "AAWW, you're going to miss me." The sun was setting, a tiny spark still visible as the last of the visitors ambled up to the main entrance into Sanagakure. They arrived in a cavalcade from the Land of Iron for the shinobi on guard duty to inspect. A group of civilians being escorted by samurai in a heat they weren't used to was nothing to get excited about, as it was hot enough already, but occasionally, Cammy decided to send them something delectable with the newest arrivals. "Can I carry your bags, miss?" The sound of the ANBU's voice startled the semi-petite civilian near the head of the cavalcade. She had short, straight black hair. It brushed the back of her neck, very dark blue eyes, almost black, and wore the traditional courtier outfit of the Land of Iron. He could see clearly that was where she was from, but as his hidden eyes took in her slight, albeit nicely shaped, form, she shivered involuntarily. If she could see his eyes, she imagined they would be heavily lidded. Wasn't that incredibly unprofessional? The girl shook her head quickly at his question, reflexively gripping the strap of her bag tighter than necessary. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Sayuri," she said softly, and squeaked when the shinobi prodded her. It wasn't all show. She was restraining from pummeling him, and that sort of self-control came with a fair amount of involuntary sounds. Her instinct was to throttle, threaten, and enjoy it. She couldn't do that here. The last time someone had touched her without permission, they'd ended up just missing the hospital and landing a good half a mile away once she was done with them. "Sayuri?" the man drawled, indicating she should elaborate. "Sayuri Nakayama," she replied quickly. "Where are you from?" he asked. It was a stupid question really, considering her entourage. "Iron," she mumbled, lowering her eyes to stare at the kunai in the man's hand. He was spinning it around in his hand almost languidly, just poking and prodding her for information, like it was the most common thing for a complete stranger to do. Her eyes moved up his arm, resting on his face, and she realized he must be watching her closely under that dog mask. Now, Sakura Haruno considered herself a good liar. She'd had her fair share of missions where it was necessary. But the way he was standing, almost like a predator, and less like an uptight or even aloof Anbu, one would think she was dangerous. It made her worry that he was seeing straight through her lies. "Sayuri Nakayama," he repeated. "I'll remember that." "Oh, Cammy." He was checking her out, not evaluating her cover story. She really had no idea whether or not Anbu were supposed to hit on civilians. "I'll be off duty tonight," he continued. "There's this great club off the civilian district called the Zephyr. I'll see you there?" She wasn't here for him, not even remotely, but she wasn't about to pass up the opportunity to gather information from a very eager sand shinobi. She smiled at him, taking in the delicate features of his porcelain mask. "And how will I know it's you?" "I'll call you. My petal." "She's unavailable," came a slightly gruff reply from behind the girl. The man was tall, sporting a nodashi on his belt and narrowing his dark eyes at the Anbu. "Oh," Sakura said, giggling in a nervous tone. "This is my brother, Hayato Nakayama." "A samurai?" the guard asked, appraising the man. He was indeed wearing an insignia that marked him as a samurai, but he wore civilian clothes. "Retired," Hayato said dismissively. "Caught Sayuri here in bed with a noble and I hacked the man's balls off for touching her, so they gave me a dishonorable discharge." The unnamed Anbu guard balked, now gripping his kunai tighter as though afraid this Hayato might suddenly decide to attack him. He swallowed heavily and squeaked out a hurried, "Welcome to Suna," before waving them through the checkpoint. Sakura wasn't sure what to feel about that display, but she kept quiet as Tenzo broke them away from the caravan and without so much as a word, headed straight for the nearest apartment block to the Case Cage's administration building. The civilians traveling with them were just passing through and had agreed to let them tag along as far as Suna. They said their goodbyes. And if she didn't know that Tenzo had arranged for an apartment, she'd be worried about finding somewhere to live, let alone at such short notice. She hated hotels. In her mission briefing with Shikamaru, the lazy Junin had informed her of the length girls, women, and men alike went to in order to get close to Gara Sabaku. Tears, tantrums, bribery, blackmail, stalking, it was actually quite terrifying. Sensing an argument coming the moment the door to their room closed behind them, Tenzo covered Sakura's mouth with his hand and shook his head. He waited for her to give a reluctant nod before tentatively letting go of her. What was he up to now? She stole the larger bedroom as Tenzo prowled his way through the apartment, doing Kami knew what. There was no deadline on this mission, but Naruto had stressed the need to Sakura not to take her time. They needed to know if Gaara would turn on them if Sasuke, or any of their many and sundry enemies were to attack them. And any and all possible paths to that destination had to be taken into consideration. She sighed, exiting her bedroom in time to see Tenzo fluffing out a couch cushion unnecessarily and moving to the coffee table to methodically rearrange the magazines provided there. Great, she was now living with a neat freak. She had never known that the captain was this meticulous. Just like with civilians, ninja were not neat or messy by job description alone. Naruto was naturally messy, and Kakashi was tidy and organized, the only messes made by his clothes and other linen, while Sai was a mixture of both. Sakura had spent a few nights at the ex-Root's place before. He'd roped her into sitting still long enough to be sketched, when she didn't have the patience to remain for him to paint her. And while most rooms were practically immaculate, his studio was far from it. He was a messy artist, at least when at home. Tenzo was in a league of his own. Sakura watched him comb the small apartment, arranging, rearranging, and checking for dust mites. He didn't even look up at her when she scoffed at him. He opened, closed, paused and then opened cupboards again, only to shut them and move on to the fridge. She was suspicious enough, but even more so when he didn't pick out anything to eat. "What are you doing?" she asked, when he finally exited a door down the hallway away from the bedrooms, clearly more satisfied than one should be when leaving a bathroom. "I was making sure there were no bugs," he said simply. "Keeping up appearances of being a neat freak is a cover I use often. It's habit now too." Sakura felt so stupid. Oh, right. This whole undercover business was not alien to her, since she'd done this enough times. But she suddenly felt like a rookie with less than a handful under her belt. And it grated on her that she'd forgotten such a basic rule of covert missions. Never assume no one's watching. Or listening in, really. She throttled an image of Naruto in her head for creating this mission, as well as one of herself for accepting it. But there was no going back now. What the hell was that with the Anbu outside Suna's main entrance all that about? She asked, her voice slightly higher as she tried to regain some of her dignity. "Since when does your cover include threatening Suna guards with bodily harm if they come anywhere near me?" Tenzo just shrugged. "The overprotective big brother thing is natural for me, and in case you've forgotten, I've used the persona of Hayato Nakayama before. He doesn't mess about, thank you very much." He gave what she considered an uncharacteristic grunt to prove his point and returned to his bedroom, closing the door behind him like he really was her big brother. Sakura couldn't help the smile on her face as she made her way back to her own. It shouldn't surprise her that Tenzo had thought this through. From his suggestion that they pretend to have grown up in the land of iron, to him retaking an old cover of a retired samurai. Supposedly, when samurai were dishonorably discharged, their names were struck off of official records. This made it easier for someone like Tenzo to impersonate one. The downside was that he'd had to become an expert in samurai culture, traditions, fighting style, the list went on. But it was worth it to have a stable cover identification that he could fall back on during these types of missions. Sakura, for her part, had decided to take a civilian cover. It was the easier persona for her to settle into at such short notice. Their intelligence placed the Case Cage's mansion as a thoroughfare for office assistants, and having assisted Tsunade more times than she could count, Sakura was sure she'd be perfect for the recent job opening. But there was nagging doubt in her head. Even though she wasn't depicted as a ninja, and the shinobi in this village believed she came from the land of iron, there was no way she'd be chosen as the Case Cage's personal assistant. The risk she was some foreign spy would prevent that. But Shikamaru had said they were getting desperate. Apparently, Tamari kept firing the new recruits for paying too much attention to her brother's lips, hair, eyes, body. They weren't doing their jobs properly, if at all. Sakura supposed she didn't need to convince them to hire her to get into the building, but she'd brought a fake resume with her, nonetheless. It had taken her forever to fix it up, considering she couldn't put any real referees on it, but 12 hours and 10 pots of coffee later, she finally finished her masterpiece. Naruto hadn't been exaggerating about her proficiency when it came to paperwork. Naruto. She still didn't know what that baka had been hiding from her. Sakura sighed, grabbed her toiletries and decided on a shower. She'd heard the plumbing here was pitiful compared to Konoha, and wasn't disappointed. After screaming obscenities for almost 10 minutes, she finally emerged and ignored the chuckles from her companion who had exited his room and plopped himself on the couch lazily. Sometimes he reminded her of Kakashi, despite their differences of opinions on how to run a successful mission. They'd apparently been on missions together years ago, and despite the distance between them since Kakashi left Anbu, though Tenzo was out of there now anyhow, had always held a high respect for each other. Making a mental note to query her brother about that later, Sakura closed her door before realizing she'd just walked past Tenzo clad in only her towel. No wonder he'd looked at her like she'd grown an extra head. Sakura slid the towel off of her body and stared at herself in the full-length mirror. Her body was toned, but she wasn't some muscled kunoichi. She trained sure, but had never gained much muscle, not really. The thought of being a bulked-up ninja, an image Ino had plastered all over her mind when they were both 10 years old, had kept her conscientious about it anyway. She peered closer, looking into the reflection of her eyes. Pools of dark blue, almost black, stared back at her. She knew she was wearing contacts, but they glinted up close, hinting at the jade orbs hidden within. Somehow, they still looked like her eyes. She avoided anything chakra based on setting up her appearance, keeping it as natural as possible. She used herbs to shift her scent, a smell that her original scent could merge with. It seemed to come off as natural enough, courtesy of Kakashi, but her idea. Her hair was colored with a mordant dye, a type of self-indulgence that was a well-known, though slightly outdated in other lands, fad in the land of iron for young women. Her fingernails were slightly longer than what was practical for a kunoichi, and she had put up with Ino's fussing until she perfected a new walk. The side effect of her elite Junin status was that she naturally walked lighter and with a slightly predatory mood that hinted to her training. She had civilian friends and used them as inspiration to circumvent the more obvious traits. She was confident it had worked. She shook herself, reaching for a simple, dark red slink of a dress she'd bought especially for this occasion, and she was just slipping into it when her brother's voice carried down the hall and into her room. "Sayuri?" Tenzo called out, and Sakura realized she had indeed been quiet long enough for him to be concerned. Even in their apartment, they had to keep up appearances. She wasn't Sakura anymore after all. "Hayato," she answered, grabbing her purse, slipping on some shoes and walking out of her bedroom. "I thought you were going to sulk all night," Tenzo said, smirking. "I'm heading out," she said. "Are you going out alone?" Sakura waited for him to offer to come with her, but he just smiled at her. Obviously, she snapped, and without waiting for a response, strode out of the apartment. Seriously, what was Tenzu's part in this mission? She had two objectives to begin with. 1. Head over to that nightclub, the Zephyr, or whatever it was called, and squeeze out whatever information she could. And 2. Get some sort of job that would put her in spitting distance of the case cage, or the council, either one. But tonight was all about the former. That Anbu might have been scared off by Tenzu's typically domineering personality, but there were more where he came from. After a few days of waiting through the shinobi in the Zephyr, Sakura came up empty. None of them were the one who'd greeted her at the gates, and none of the ones left seemed willing to do anything except dance and drink with her before casually suggesting she go back to their place. Idiots, like she would ever. However, they were very forthcoming when it came to job opportunities. That was how she was finally permitted a job interview with the case cage 1 week on from arriving in Suna. Finally, she was allowed to go near him, and her real mission could begin. As Tenzo scouted out the dojos, making friends in the way only a gruff, ex-samurai could, Sakura nervously made her way to the case cage's administration building. There were so many ways all her planning could come crashing down around her. She did, of course, the only thing she could do. She held her head high and knocked on the door, only to have to wait a full 10 minutes, in the heat of the unforgiving sun before being allowed inside. The man who let her in was Anbu and escorted her to the top level outside Gaara's office saying, "Wait out here and don't make a sound until you're called for," before using Shunshin to leave her standing there alone. Fortunately, Sakura didn't have to wait much longer before the door to Gaara's office slammed open, almost coming off its hinges. "Get off my brother, you lecherous whore." The scream startled Sakura out of her reverie and she clutched her folder tighter, hugging it to her chest. What the hell was going on in here? A red-headed girl came tumbling out of the room before Sakura could step in front of it. Her hair was a mess, Her clothes askew, and the girl was so startled that she didn't notice she had an audience. She was flustered, a little annoyed, and yet trembling like she'd just been accosted by a horde of naked old perverts. Almost immediately, a buxom blonde with 4 pigtails and brandishing an iron fan stormed into the hallway, and Sakura flushed slightly, flashing back to that mission briefing with Shikamaru. Watch out for Temari, he'd warned her. She's protective of Gaara, and if anyone's going to question who you really are, it's her. That woman is so troublesome. Sakura wasn't scared of the older sister of the case cage, she could hold her own. But she wasn't sure how to pull off that "you can't touch this" vibe as a civilian. It suddenly occurred to her that she was far out of her league. She had quite a number of covert missions under her belt, but none dealing with people she'd already met. The last one had almost killed her because she didn't know enough about them, thanks to some bad intelligence from the land of rivers. "I'm not a victim," she thought, repeating the mantra a few times as Temari moved threateningly toward the trembling girl she just chased out of the case cage's office. The young civilian looked all of 15 years old, and terrified as she gave a squeak of fear. Sakura barely had time to sidestep out of the way as the petite redhead barreled down the hallway, toward the exit and freedom. "And don't come back," the blonde kunoichi screamed. Sakura held her breath, trying to disappear into the wallpaper. Seriously, this woman held no sway over her hammering heart. She remembered the last time she'd seen her, Temari had been all smiles and warmth. But right now, she looked like one glare from her could make a horde of rhinos stampede in the opposite direction. "Get a grip, Sakura. You're a kunoichi, so start acting like one." Except she wasn't one right now, and this terrifying side of Temari apparently scared any and all civilians, not to mention shinobi who wanted to be able to actually pleasure a woman. Sakura inhaled deeply, calming herself. This was what Shikamaru had warned her about, and she needed to get her head back on the mission. "Fucking slut," Temari mumbled. "That'll teach you not to grope the case cage." The blonde, who Sakura had recognized immediately as Temari, Gaara's older sister, turned to look at her. For a moment, her dark eyes narrowed, like she recognized her. She looked startled, and it took a full 10 seconds for her to fully grasp the concept that this was a complete stranger, and she lost the startled expression. Temari's eyes flickered over the folder in Sakura's hands, back up to her face, and then it dawned on her. Her lips twisted into an evil grin. "Next victim. I think you should fuck that one," Kankuro said, pointing shamelessly to a blonde girl who looked barely out of her teens. Gaara snorted. That was the stupidest thing his brother had said so far, and Kankuro had said some pretty dumb things over the past hour. "No," he said gruffly. "Seriously, Gaara. What's the point of being case cage if you don't take advantage of it? I'm looking for a receptionist, not a lover." Kankuro laughed. "Yeah, right." Temari's scared another one off. Gaara had created a jutsu that allowed others to see what he saw when he activated his third eye, and was currently employing it so they could both watch their sister scare the pants off the girls out in the hallway. It made the image larger, but slightly fuzzy. It had been a battle-bred technique. But Kankuro was the type of sibling that whined until he got what he wanted. That was why Gaara relented. The best analogy for this was a portable television. Kankuro snorted. "I think she's just thinning the herd." But Gaara didn't mind. The last 3 she'd chased out had been dressed like they were auditioning for Suna's skankiest hoe, rather than sorting through tedious paperwork. He appreciated that each and every girl sitting out there was an interesting specimen of the female body, but this was not the time and place for that. He wasn't a prude, just picky. His sister was prowling up and down the line, randomly telling one or more to leave before she wrung their pretty little neck. The ones who bravely faced her thinking that might endear them to her, or the redhead they were really here for, were forcibly removed from the building in such a way that the other girls had started visibly shaking in fear. Every girl out there was at least an hour early for their respective interviews, and there was only one person who hadn't shown up yet. Kankuro hadn't noticed this, however, his eyes raking the bodies waiting out there, not counting the heads. There was a loud screech, followed by a thumping sound, and before Gaara could have the next girl who wasn't quite so scantily clad brought in, Kankuro shunshined out of the room obediently. Some of the girls had experience, so the case cage decided to give them a go. He asked questions, their eyes traveled over his body, he tested them, and as was predicted, they made mistakes. After the dramatic exit of a now disheveled 15-year-old redhead, the last of the girls that hadn't been chased off by Tamari before they could even enter the office. Gaara sighed, almost defeated. This was going nowhere. His brother re-entered the office, chuckling. Tamari's having more fun than you are. That was never not going to happen. I like that blonde one, Kankuro said, whistling. Do you mind if I tap that? Gaara didn't respond, just frowning. He was watching the next applicant through his third eye. From the moment she'd been let in the building, he'd been watching her, arriving at a more appropriate time. This one was suitably dressed, though obviously frightened by his sister's tactics. It frightened him a little, not that he'd ever admit it, and wore no ostensive makeup. She looked professional. Surprising. He looked down at the paperwork in front of him. Her name was Sayuri Nakayama, hailing from the land of iron. She'd only recently moved here, which wasn't something he was too comfortable with, but it explained why she wasn't dressed like a harlot. Perhaps she wanted this job for the right reasons? Kankuro peered through the sand-eye jutsu, and then read the dossier over his brother's shoulder. As was expected by someone as high-ranking as the case cage, Gaara had taken the time to research all of his potential receptionists. While a handful of them had filing and sorting experience, only one knew, for example, the difference between rank A and rank C when it came to village-wide alert status. She's cute, Kankuro commented. But she doesn't show off enough. He broke off as Gaara's sand hit his stomach, and then gasped. Oh okay, I'll leave you alone with her. He teleported out. Gaara restrained from chuckling, turning his attention now to what was going on outside his office. Tamari's eyes flickered over the folder in Sakura's hands, back up to her face, and then it dawned on her. Her lips twisted into an evil grin. Next victim. For what seemed like an eternity, the blonde just stared at the girl in front of her. Implying pain and suffering was, at times, as bad as actually following through on said threat. Tamari's eyes glinted as she raked Sakura, thinking this just another civilian, showing without acting, just how much she wanted to eviscerate her. It was a scare tactic that the Konohaku no Ichi was personally familiar with. She did it to Naruto often enough. It was terrifying. Tamari, stop blocking the door and let her in. Sakura almost let down her facade, realizing she hadn't heard Gaara's voice in years. It was so strange to hear it drift through the half-open door as though he was standing next to her and not over 10 feet away. It was huskier than she remembered. Remembering she had legs, Sakura walked toward the door, not looking toward the case cage as his sand shot up and closed the door, deliberately locking Tamari out of the room. Miss Nakayama, Gaara said politely. Please come further in, I won't bite you. Sakura nodded lamely and moved toward his desk. There was no chair provided, but she didn't complain. She finally looked at him, the feel of his eyes on her drawing her attention. He'd grown into his good looks, that was for sure, and once where she admitted he was cute, he was now absolutely gorgeous. His hair was a slightly darker shade of crimson, his face leaner. Having lost his childlike appeal, it was more like captivating now. She struggled to look him in the eye. He was calm and collected, looking her over while she was trembling inside. No doubt, she looked as nervous as she felt. Sakura cleared her throat and bowed appropriately. Case Cage-sama, thank you for seeing me. His eyes drifted to the paperwork in front of him, not really taking in much other than the list of administration skills. He was making her nervous, this was obvious. She was flushed, avoiding eye contact and leaving it up to him to carry the conversation. He didn't want the person he finally decided on to be his secretary, scared of him. There was a better way to do this. In a flash, he was out of his chair and standing in front of her. He watched her eyes widen, her hands tremble, and the folder in her arms pressed firmly against her chest. I've read your file, he said, his voice deep. But now I want to know the real you. His hand shot up, not too fast, not too slow, his fingers danced over her arm. Sakura had chosen to wear something closer to the kind of clothes worn by receptionists in Sakata. The innocuous town Tenzu's samurai cover had claimed he was from originally, that she'd incorporated into her own. No matter where Hayato's duties had taken him, Sayuri was a hometown kind of girl. The uniform was an offshoot, stringent on the gray and red colors. Currently, Gaara's fingers seemed interested in the material of her thin blouse. It was red while the vest was gray. Not fashionable, but at least predictable for a civilian who took her job seriously. A flash of something along the lines of intrigue registered on his face before he leant in closer to her. His face was 2 inches from hers as he cocked his head to the side, smirking slightly. Sakura felt like she suddenly weighed a ton. Her legs threatened to give way and she was struggling to breathe. What the hell was the cage doing? His mouth went to her ear and he whispered, "I want to know what you feel like." Gaara was coming onto her. Sakura froze up, suddenly scared. His lips trailed down her now heated flesh. Reaching the pulse point, his fingers pushed aside the collar of her blouse to get at her and she hugged the folder tighter to her chest at the dizzying sensation of his tongue on her bare skin. What do I do? On one hand, she needed him right where he was, running his hands along her arm and licking her pulse point. But on the other hand, they just met, and she wasn't entirely sure whether this was a dream or a nightmare. The last girl that came this way was scared off by Temari. The idea of the oldest Sabaku brandishing her iron fan at Sakura with intent to maim sent shivers down her spine. That red-headed 15-year-old girl had apparently groped Gaara. I'm not groping him. And she wasn't this easy, mission or no mission. Pull away, Sakura. She repeated the mantra, having trouble with the actual execution part of that plan. Kaze. She tried to put her thoughts into coherent words, willing her body to stop trembling, but it fell apart when Gaara purred. He purred, and it was his turn to speak. The words that fell out of his mouth as easy as breathing literally took her breath away. Her face must have turned beet red, it certainly felt like it had. But along with the embarrassment, and the part of her that was tantalized by this very forward cage, she was also suddenly angry. Violent fantasies invaded her mind and she had to hold herself back from hitting him. She took a deep breath. If Tsunade could see her now, the woman would be chanting, "Take him on the desk, you fool." But she couldn't. No, she wouldn't. Leave him here today with the impression that she was a slut. Besides, the mission didn't dictate she had to act like some barnyard whore. It wasn't really her style anyway. Sakura closed her eyes, inwardly lamented at what she was about to do, and took a hasty step away from the cage. Immediately, the heat radiating through her body disappeared and she looked up into surprised pools of light green. "Cage-sama," she said softly, trying to retain as much of her dignity as she could. That was completely wrong, no matter how good it had felt. Gaara's expression quickly changed and she saw the relief. What the hell? He returned to his position behind his desk and watched her attempts to recover. There was only one explanation for his seemingly irrational actions. It was a test. It was a test. It was a test. She let out a deep sigh, unable to hide her relief. Oh, thank Kami. And it all suddenly made sense. The cage had more admirers than a candy store. Of course, he was testing her. And not for the first time, she felt wholly inadequate in this game they were playing. Sakura attempted to appear less ruffled than what she was feeling, frowning at her prospective employer and feeling a little of her old self filter through as she glared at him. He chuckled at her. "You're wrong about that, it was very good." "Oh God, shut up." But she just sighed, straightening her blouse unnecessarily. He gave her a slight smile that looked almost as fake as the one Sai used to deliver on a daily basis. Except this one didn't morph his entire face like the artist's so-called smiles tended to do. It was more like an uncheeky smirk. She wasn't sure how else to describe it. "You're hired." Sakura had a sudden, uncontrollable flashback to when she was still a genin in Kakashi's words after their bell test. Gaara's, "You're hired," echoed, "You pass," and she inwardly shuddered at the comparison. Both tests had been delivered by a special brand of psycho. Fuck. Temari gave her the evil eye when she was finally allowed back in the room, making no attempts to hide her dislike of the woman her brother had chosen. Sakura had to keep reminding herself that she was just being an overprotective big sister, and while this was personal, she was also a rational human being. She'd get over it eventually. Immediately after being told she was hired, Sakura let out an involuntary yelp as Konkuro appeared out of nowhere. The puppet master proceeded to run down her responsibilities, the shakedown, as he put it, of her job description, and took her on a tour of the building. She was shown the emergency exits where the tea room and bathroom respectively she was allowed to use were. Sakura took it all in silently. Konkuro even jumped behind the desk she would be using and printed out a copy of her hours, Gaara's schedule. He made her pinky promise not to tell his brother she was getting that right away, and a layout of the building in case she ever got lost. He was sweet, and for that, she was grateful. At least it was only one Sabaku sibling with her name on there, must kill list. If she'd really been a civilian, she might have wondered why Gaara didn't just hire his siblings part-time. Kankuro looked like a natural behind that desk. It did occur to her, however, that maybe a man instead of some random girl who might try to glomp him would even be better. But she didn't ask, she supposed he had his reasons. The words he'd whispered in her ear during his test made her blush inexplicably and served to explain, at least on some level, why he didn't mind a woman hanging around his office all day. Kankuro finished the tour, told her that she could go home for now. Apparently, Gaara would be in a meeting with the council for the rest of the day, and to have everything he needed ready by 9 o'clock the next morning. Tenzo was waiting for her when she came back. She started visibly shaking the moment the door closed behind her, and Sakura let out a long-winded sigh. He could see the frustration building up in her, and again, the Wood Master wondered why Naruto had chosen her specifically for this mission. Sakura. His voice startled her, and she started. Hiya. Drop the facade, Tenzo said. Just let it go for a moment. This place is free of bugs, and I've placed chakra detectors around both the building and the apartment itself. Just tell me what's wrong, Sakura, straight up. Sakura wasn't comfortable with this, but there was no one else she could talk to about this. Treading carefully, she inched into the apartment, stopping at the coffee table and plopping down on the couch with a soft hiccuping sound. She sighed. I wasn't expecting the case cage to come onto me. There, she said it. Tenzo chuckled. Sorry, he added when she glared at him. But it's funny. It is not. Now he was laughing at her. It's not funny. Sakura waited for him to stop laughing, but he kept going. The Tenzo she knew wasn't this jovial. What the hell was his problem? He calmed down when she lost her infuriated look. Sorry, Sakura, but it is funny. Continue. She crossed her arms over her chest. As long as you promise not to laugh. He crossed his heart and she rolled her eyes. Promise. She took a deep breath and told him everything. He startled the shit out of me, asking to be stroked. Tenzu's eyes widened. And what did you do? That had been too forward, even for someone as tactless as the case cage. Sakura bristled. I wanted to kick his ass from here to Konoha. But you didn't. Of course not, she snapped, barely listening to him. What kind of ninja do you take me for? Honestly? I'd have thought a smart one, he said. Sakura growled dangerously at him and he attempted to explain. You didn't realize him coming onto you was his way of testing you? To make sure you weren't some random fangirl? I knew he was testing me. Before, during, or after? Sakura growled. After. Tenzo bit his bottom lip to keep from laughing again. Well, I'm glad you're in one piece. Temari's a strong woman, and if she'd caught you in that compromising position. Sakura shuddered at the thought. Shikamaru warned me, but I have to say, she's a lot scarier than I remember. Well, you had no reason to fear her then, and she was probably a little intimidated herself. Huh? Tenzo shrugged his shoulders. You have a temper, super strength, and the legendary Slug Queen as your mentor. Sakura shook her head. She wasn't intimidated by me. He fell silent, replaying what she'd told him in his head. There was something in it that wasn't quite adding up. Tenzo frowned. Sakura? What did Naruto tell you about the case cage? Sakura shrugged. Just that he's not in a relationship, that he knew, and some ridiculous idea that I was going to catch his eye immediately. Tenzo tugged on the edge of her shirt absent-mindedly. Anything else? No, why? Because he's definitely set you up, Sakura. Huh? She'd accused Naruto of not telling her everything, but from the moment he suggested the mission to the last time she'd seen him before leaving, Sakura hadn't been able to get any more out of him. It was Shikamaru who'd told her the only thing useful regarding Gaara. Don't touch his sand without permission. Rumors that he's an incorrigible flirt only heighten his popularity, Tenzo said, sighing deeply, and wondering whether or not Naruto had a death wish. She was going to kill him when they got back. Everyone I talked to says there have been girls he's invited into his bedroom before. I'd say, knowing he likes the occasional romp gives them hope that they'll be next. Or that he'll finally settle down and choose between all his gushing fans for a wife. It sounded ridiculous though, not that she could talk, being a former Sasuke Uchiha fangirl, and Sakura couldn't help but wonder what those rumors said about his performance. She blushed slightly, turning her head in an attempt to hide it from Tenzo. The man was happily leaning back on his end of the couch, waiting for her to start the conversation up again. She'd wondered if the heat, the attention, and having to constantly be on guard for the next random fangirl had finally driven the case cage mad. The way Gaara had come onto her, his words both before and after she'd pulled away, yeah, there was a definite pattern. Sakura cleared her throat. So, what you're saying is that he really did enjoy what he did to me? Tenzo nodded silently and Sakura inhaled sharply. There was only one explanation, and according to the Woodmaster, Naruto had known all along. The case cage was a pervert. Look on the bright side, Tenzo said, patting her arm in an obnoxiously brotherly way. At least he'll be easier to seduce this way. Sakura let out a groan in both frustration and embarrassment and buried her head in her hands. As it turned out, the case cage's administration building had no fangirls whatsoever. Job applications for the position of personal assistant to the case cage aside, the place was devoid of anything that remotely resembled giggling, starstruck stalkers. Sakura imagined they had their own pen, on the other side of the village, where someone like Kankuro went to give them their daily feeding. The mental images made her giggle and she quickly covered her mouth, looking around to make sure she was alone. Sitting behind her desk, she was glad the week was almost over. As much as she was enjoying this job, she needed to get out of here for longer than an overnight in her apartment. It got lonely after a while. This place kind of creeped her out, too. It made her think he thought this was a game. So, she decided to play this smart. Taking Shikamaru's advice, she'd done her best to steer clear of Tamari, though she was beginning to think that woman could see through walls. But the blonde wasn't so easily sidetracked. She didn't like her and didn't hold back. There was no direct attack on her person. But Sakura found herself having to go the long way to her desk because Tamari would sometimes deliberately block the most direct route. With Gaara's warning, she didn't have the authority to dismiss her, but had apparently scared the last 3 receptionists Gaara had hired so bad that they'd either left Suna altogether or hadn't been seen anywhere near any ninja building since. Still, things were a little better on the seducing the case cage front. Not perfect, but better. Sakura hadn't been lying when she told Naruto she was not some kind of seductress, but that blonde baka had set her up, knowing the rumors outside of Suna about him being something akin to Aal were completely false. It made her wonder if the other things Naruto had said were true. What had he said? He loves mysterious women, right? And apparently, she was baffling enough without having taken on an alter ego, internal, freaking insane doppelgangers notwithstanding. Sakura scrunched her eyes closed, picturing herself throttling the Hokage. You are so dead when I get home, Naruto. Having taken his words to heart, she did however, quickly find the case cage watching her. It was the reason Gaara gave her those sidelong glances. And now, at the end of the week, he was ogling her covertly every time she walked by, without her having to even enter his office. She didn't want to push her luck though, especially since she'd discovered that redhead who'd groped him during those ridiculous excuses for interviews hadn't actually instigated anything with him. It made sense. Sakura ran her forefinger across her pulse point absent-mindedly. Gaara had touched her, whispered things that made her blush and explored the junction between her neck and shoulders with his tongue. If he'd done anything even remotely like that to a fangirl, well, of course the crazy girl had responded inappropriately. The women that Sakura encountered who actually did work here, however, were polite, appropriately dressed, and inviting. This entire week had been an eye-opener. It started out as some kind of practical joke. At least, she hoped it was. What had first seemed like a weird but doable mission turned into the most embarrassing job interview of her entire ninja career. Sakura Haruno aka Sayuri Nakayama, was a studious and highly efficient receptionist, but working for Tsunade had never been a full-time thing. She'd sorted the 5th Hokage's paperwork, run errands, organized, delegated, and filled in for Shizune when she was away or unwell. But working for Gaara was very different again. And what was the joke? As it turned out, Naruto had been right. She was perfect for this job. It still reminded her of all those times she picked up after Tsunade, however. Though she seriously doubted Gaara would ever end the day drunk, passed out on his desk and mumbling, "Fuck you cranky bastards," in his sleep, among other things. A drunken Tsunade was always entertaining, unconscious or not. Sayuri-san? Sakura snapped out of her reverie at the sound of the familiar voice. The woman's name was Yoshiko Mori, Shizune's age, she'd guess. The first woman in this entire building to speak to Sakura. Tamari didn't count. Yoshiko was the personal assistant to one of the counselors and had been for years. If Sakura remembered correctly, the man's name was Shin. Yoshiko-san, Can I help you? The papers for the upcoming meet with the daimyo, Yoshiko said, placing a manila folder in Sakura's waiting hands. Shin-sensei wishes the Case-Cage-sama to look at them immediately. The bottom of the pile then, Sakura joked, and the woman chuckled slightly. Her personality actually reminded Sakura of Shizune. So much so that she knew she could joke about something like that and Yoshiko would just wave it away. When the dark-haired woman didn't immediately walk away, like every other time she dropped off something important for Gaara, or picked up, Sakura gave her a curious smile and Yoshiko obliged. Apparently, the rumor is that you're from one of the larger civilian villages in Iron. The curiosity in her voice surprised Sakura. This was the first time the woman had expressed an interest in her background. Sakura nodded her head however, fingering the manila folder meant for Gaara thoughtfully. Sakata is large. Larger than any other village I've seen, other than this one of course. Oh, how many is that? What is this, an interrogation? A few. I miss traveling, Yoshiko said wistfully. You're not from Suna either? Oh, I am. I'm a retired kunoichi. You must have seen a lot. Sakura indulged her as Yoshiko talked about a mission to Mist that had started as an A rank but was quickly reduced to B when their quarry turned out to be bandits rather than rogue ninja. That was my last mission, she said. Shortly afterward, I found out I was pregnant, and decided to give that life up. You have a daughter, her name is Samara. Sakura just nodded as she heard Gaara moving around in his office. The older woman noticed too and made to leave before the case cage caught her talking instead of doing her job. But Yoshiko looked over her shoulder as she left, and grinned. I should have you over sometime next week. Samara-chan is an excellent cook. Sakura returned the smile. I would like that. The giggling gaggle of girls standing outside the Zephyr as though waiting for permission to enter weren't dressed for this weather. Sakura glanced at them as she passed by to enter the club. The brunette girl at the head of the group caught her eye, raking over the body of the former pinkette. She scrutinized her with critical eyes, and something Sakura recognized from kunoichi all the time back in Konoha. A predatory challenge that screamed, I can kill you 1,000 ways. The girl had all the signs of a ninja. She filed that information away just in case and continued inside the nightclub, not even hesitating as the brunette kept watching her. She had more important fish to fry, so to speak. It had been 2 weeks since her arrival in Suna, and exactly that long for him to approach her after that incident with Tenzo, and finally, barely 5 minutes after she'd entered the nightclub, Sakura's quarry made his move on her. Hello my petal. Ah, there he is, she thought, grinning inwardly. Sakura hadn't forgotten the guard who'd cracked onto her when she first arrived in Suna. He was behind her, her skin tingled slightly at the sudden warmth, despite the fact that he wasn't actually touching her. She turned slowly, taking a half-hearted step away from him to avoid brushing against him. This Anbu was gorgeous. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and bright blue eyes twinkled mischievously at her, much like Naruto's did when he was being cheeky, but with an allure that painted him in the same category of a suave Kakashi. Shuin, he said immediately, when she started to wonder if she should ask him his name. My name is Shuin. Real or code? She asked. Real. He smirked and she was immediately and heavily reminded of Sasuke. Now that she looked closer, he could definitely pass off as an Uchiha. Can I get you a drink? She let him lead her toward the bar, and Sakura went over her plan in her head. She'd told Kankuro she was coming here, and although Gaara wasn't in the room at the time, she knew he'd heard her. There wasn't much of a chance of this happening overnight, but Sakura needed access to high-level documents, for the case cage's eyes-only type of scrolls, and Kami knew where the redhead kept them. If they were in his office, they were well hidden. Tenzo had visited her during a few lunch breaks over the week, about the time Gaara conveniently went missing, and able to use his chakra without someone accusing him of being a ninja pretending to be a civilian, had placed some sensors nearby. He couldn't get into the office however, so it was all from outside. There didn't seem to be anything tucked away, just out of sight. That left Gaara's home. As much as Sakura hated to admit it, and liked it, really, considering Gaara was a very attractive man, she was going to have to earn herself a personal invite to the case cage's mansion. She wasn't going to get it by hanging around the office and pretending to enjoy deciding on what color paper looked best coming out of the printer. After a week of seductive glances from the fifth case cage, she realized it was time to get more proactive. Your brother isn't here? Shuin asked. Sakura realized she'd let her thoughts wander. 2 hours after she'd arrived, her new drinking buddy had given her feet a break and suggested they settle onto one of the couches in a corner booth instead. The Anbu was running his fingers along her bare arm, just looking at her. It sounded sleazy, but she was having a hard time trying to feel disgusted. Sakura shook her head. No, he doesn't much like the noise. Somehow, shortly after Sakura spotted a few familiar faces in the crowd, her conversation with Shuin slipped inexplicably from whose turn it was to buy the next round to her preference in weapons. Oh yeah, she was talking about the things she got up to that her brother wouldn't approve of. I prefer the Nodashi, she said, her fingers brushing the weapon Shuin was hiding under his jacket. He just smiled at her. That's a difficult sword for someone who doesn't know how to handle it. I can handle it, is that so? Sakura nodded, now looking into his eyes. I learned how to in a martial arts school in Sakata. We used saburito in our training sessions. A saburito was a heavy wooden sword, and Sakura had only ever used one once, when she was visiting Tenten and the weapon's mistress had begged until she agreed to train with her. Apparently, the rest of her team had been busy that day. Figures. That girl went crazy with her weapons, no matter who her opponent was. I see you as more of a Naginata kind of girl, Shuin added, interrupting her thoughts. Do you know what? A much more balanced weapon, she said slowly. Better suited for combat I suppose, but I don't see combat. Of course, he said. You're not a warrior? She shook her head and turned away from him to order another drink from a passing waitress. Sakura let her eyes drift toward the direction she knew Gaara and his siblings had been a few minutes ago. Temari and Kankuro were talking, with the blonde still glancing at Sayuri. Every now and then with a look of deep suspicion on her face, Kankuro looked happy regardless. The redhead was nearby also, and Sakura caught those aqua eyes in hers. He was expressionless, but his body language was tense, like he was annoyed with something. After a moment of fighting her inner urge to just run over there and jump him, Sakura tore her eyes away and forced herself to listen to what Shuin was saying. The pale eyes of the case cage were still watching her. She could feel that penetrating gaze of his. More than anything, she believed she intrigued him, but there was a definite, underlying need she couldn't quite put her finger on. She had to remind herself that a dark-haired civilian from the land of iron who was attractive and yet not a fangirl, was interesting in and of itself. Lust, that had to be it. I am not a pink-haired kunoichi with a temper and intimidating glare, she thought to herself, repeating it a few times just to remind herself. The waitress who'd taken her previous order returned with a new glass and Sakura happily sat backwards, sticking her finger in the liquid and playing with the ice cubes. She knew very well, from drinking sessions with her shisho to nightclubbing with Ino, that she had a low tolerance for alcohol. It made her current situation more difficult, but not impossible. She'd learnt to drink without getting drunk, and Sakura had it practically down to an art. Firstly, she had ice with every drink, ordered a new drink before she'd finished her old one, promptly passing off the latter to a passing waitress, and of course, when the opportunity presented itself, she spilt it. Even if Gaara had a way of detecting her chakra network, like the Byakugan, a sloshed woman wouldn't be a threat to him, ever. She lifted her eyes to return the stare of the case cage again and bit her bottom lip. The effect was instantaneous, and she saw his eye twitch. Shuin, she said, not taking her eyes of the redhead across the room. Stay here. The more than tipsy Anbu agent dutifully did as he was told and watched as the object of his affection stood up and strode away. But Sakura didn't head for her true target. That would defeat the purpose of not playing fair in this game. On the other side of the room, Kankuro's eyes widened as Sayuri moved toward the low-set stage. This club was popular because every now and then, they did it randomly, to keep people guessing. They let women who weren't employees pole dance in the center of a secondary stage. It was low set so that it didn't distract from the main stage, where the paid dancers entertained the crowd. He let out a whistle. The girl could dance. I thought you said Sayuri wants to fuck Gaara, Kankuro whispered to his sister. Temari sighed deeply as she watched the way the strange girl was dancing, the men around her cat-calling and making not so subtle, come hither, motions to her. Several feet away, the Anbu she recognized as Shuin was watching like some lovesick puppy. She motioned to him and he obediently made his way over to her. She proceeded to sway her hips against him, teasing, inviting, and yet carefully guarded against his own pelvic movements. She's trying to make him jealous, Tamari said, thinking that it was the only reason for the strange girl now coming onto that anbu. Kankuro chuckled, watching the way his baby brother's knuckles were gripping his chair, none too gently. And it's working. It's not funny, Tamari hissed at him. The girl's trouble. Huh? What makes you say that? She's just. Tamari bit her lip, drifting off. The truth was that there were no actual signs that this Sayuri wasn't who she said she was, but whenever she got near the girl, she got this overwhelming desire to protect Gaara from her. She's hiding something, she finished lamely. And Gaara needs to get laid. Kankuro. Tamari hissed. What? It's true, about time he found someone new. It's weird, she insisted. He's never been here before, decides all of a sudden to come, and spends every second upon arrival just sitting in that damn chair. He's scoping out the competition. He's a political figure and should know better. Kankuro snorted. Tamari, our dear brother is so much more than that. She frowned, confused. He just smiled. He's a man. He's an idiot for letting her get so close to him. Kankuro scoffed. They only met a week ago, it's not like they're hanging out in the spa together. Tamari crossed her arms over her chest defiantly. You know what Gaara is like. Last month it was some girl with oddly colored hair he was shacking up with, and now. If they sleep together, Kankuro interrupted. But he doesn't really know her, he isn't stupid enough to get carried away with some skirt. Have some faith in our little brother, big sister. She sighed. He's got the worst taste in women, ever. Kankuro chuckled, accused her of being a prude, and walked off to find some cute, willing blonde to give him a lap dance. No matter how wise Kankuro had just sounded, and she would admit that over her dead body, Tamari couldn't settle and let things be. What kind of big sister would she be if she just let women walk all over Gaara? She knew how to tell the difference between those infatuated by her youngest brother and the uninterested ones. Fangirls didn't always squeal and stalk. Some signs were more subtle than others. And seriously, if Suna was populated with nothing but Gaara fangirls, she'd be fighting a losing battle keeping them away from him. She had things under control. Tamari watched as Gaara stood up gracefully, gave Sayuri a frustratingly hungry look, and made his way out of the club. Only time would tell how this would play out, but she knew Gaara, perhaps better than Kankuro, and that Sayuri girl was definitely on his mind. The following Monday was far more normal than Sakura had anticipated. Sure, Gaara had been avoiding her all morning, and after her performance, the Friday night before, she couldn't say she was surprised, but she felt like nothing had really changed. He wasn't ignorant of the female body, and she'd heard the gossip that he was very attentive during. Her actions showed she wasn't quite as reserved as her work dress code would have him believe. But despite the change in Gaara's demeanor to her, it was still business as usual. She wondered if Gaara was only ever comfortable in UAL, or social, really, situations when he had his title to fall back on. The Zephyr didn't normally play host to the case cage apparently, so she wondered where he got his reputation from. Playing games instead of working, I see. The voice startled her, and Sakura looked up to see Kankuro smirking at her. The case cage Sama hasn't given me anything new to do, she said defensively. She'd also run through his schedule, organized her desk and resorted the filing cabinet, waiting for Gaara to emerge from his office, to no avail. So, Sumi, I'm bored. The middle Sabaku sibling sidled up next to her and peered at the computer screen. Spider Solitaire. Are you trying to make a statement? What are you talking about? You flirted your way through Friday and Saturday night, but went home alone both times, he said, gracing her with a lopsided grin. You feeling lonely? You followed me home? She asked, annoyed. Nope, Gaara did. Sakura's jaw dropped. Huh? He said it was to make sure you got home okay, he continued, losing his smile. I think he was just making sure there wasn't any competition. Excuse me? Okay, she was trying to get Gaara's attention, but for some reason, what Kankuro said surprised her. He was being extremely forward about it too, he was dead serious. Oh, come on Sayuri, he said. The sound of her fake name used so casually silenced her incoming retort. You were so hot at the Zephyr. If I knew you'd say yes, I'd have taken you home myself, both nights. Sakura blushed, lowering her face. She wasn't that bad, really? Kankuro laughed. Don't go red now, you were doing so well. Sakura managed to regain her dignity and challenge the puppet master at some of the games she'd snuck onto the desktop, but he declined, claiming to still have a hangover. So, she ended up teasing him until he agreed to swapping stories over poker. He apparently always carried a pack around with him. Temari's been out for blood since I walked in on her with a leaf ninja. Leaf? Sakura had a sudden, sickening feeling. Yeah, Shikamaru or something like that. Kankuro shrugged. Brilliant guy though, he always beat me at every game we played when he was here. Imagine that. Kankuro grinned, ignoring her jab and throwing the cards in his hands faced up on her desk. He was sitting on a chair on the other side of it. Ha ha. Read him and weep. He gave an exaggerated laugh. The sound came out more like a witch's cackle. Sakura just glared at him. He had a full house and all she'd gotten was a lousy pair of fives. Ah, shut up. He was still grinning cockily a minute later when Temari came sauntering into the hallway. Don't you have a mission to be getting to? The blonde asked her brother, not even glancing at Sakura. She ducked her head, hoping Temari would just walk away once she was done, and missed the curious glance Kankuro gave her. Yeah, he said, standing up. See ya Sayuri. Sakura waved back and chanced a glance at the oldest Sabaku. Temari was frowning at her. You're a piece of work, aren't you? Sakura instinctively growled. She hadn't meant the sound to come out, just inwardly moan or groan at the woman's approach, but didn't regret it really. This was the third time today that Temari had come up to her desk and said that. Don't you have a mission as well? She wondered. The woman was a ninja, so why was she here every day? Temari chose to ignore Sakura's growl, and instead stared down at her brother's assistant. There's something I just don't get. That your scare tactics don't scare me? Sakura thought, but kept the sarcasm off her face. She was playing the civilian card but wasn't about to turn into a whimpering doormat. Why did you even come to Suna? Sakura lost her glare, replacing it with surprise and forced herself not to roll her eyes. Excuse me? It seemed to take forever for the blonde to verbalize what she really wanted. Sakura saw the gears working in the woman's head and she remembered another of Naruto's claims. That woman knows everything. Temari bowed her head slightly, her face now strangely expressionless, and her voice came out in a monotone whisper. I know who you really are. You better not be thinking what I think you're thinking, because I will kick your ass for thinking that thought. This interruption to his normally calm facade wasn't enough to make him lash out, but Gaara could feel the frustration bubbling to the surface. His sister had been babbling for the better part of the week over his poor choice in personal assistants. She just didn't get that it didn't need to be said. Sure, this Sayuri was a weird, mysterious one, but her personality had nothing to do with his decision to hire her. And then, once Kankuro opened his big mouth and proceeded to tell Temari what Gaara had been doing with each and every candidate, the case cage was treated to a lecture on both professional courtesy and his twisted sense of duty. Temari was acting like he would have slept with each and every one of those girls if she hadn't been there to scare most of them off. What exactly is he thinking? Kankuro asked, curious. Temari crossed her arms over her shoulders. That he's going to ruin his position and reputation just to get it on with some random personal assistant. Why would that ruin him? It's inappropriate. So was him shacking up with that nurse last month, Kankuro said, ignoring Gaara's intense stare and acting like he couldn't hear them. I think he has a thing for medics. He has a thing for attracting trouble. Kankuro grinned. That's my little brother. Shut up, Temari snapped. She turned back to Gaara. Not wanting another reprimand, Gaara used his sand to shunshin out of his mansion before either of his siblings could utter another word. They'd ambushed him in his home, but the seals around his office were much better, though in hindsight, he saw how that oversight was irresponsible of him. He just didn't see the point of worrying over it, since he didn't spend that much time at home anyway, and all his important belongings had additional seals. Gaara appeared directly in front of the dark-haired young woman his sister had just been bitching about. She gave a startled, "Oh," before remembering to bow and use his title to address him. Torn between ignoring her and striding directly into his office and seeing just how easy it was to sneak up on her, Gaara stood frozen to the spot. Gaara continued to stare at her. He hadn't meant to become so interested in her. Gaara didn't fraternize with staff members. There were policies in place to prevent or punish that after all, and he'd put them there himself. Not that they'd fraternized, per se. He'd just decided to alternate between ignoring her and openly checking her out. He couldn't decide which road to take. He had no excuse for his actions, only that he was a deranged lunatic. Sayuri Nakayama. Even the name brought a strange kind of thrill trembling through his body. It sounded strange, and didn't suit her, but he couldn't help himself. Gaara thought he smelt an underlying fragrance to her existing scent. It piqued his curiosity, because no matter how much she tried to hide it with perfumes or whatever it was she was using, he could still detect the slightest traces of vanilla and strawberry underneath it all. He had always been highly intuitive that way, and her scent was driving him crazy. Maybe he was crazy. Tamari certainly seemed to think so. Gaara wasn't normally one to worry about what others thought of him. It was rarely nothing he could handle either way, but this was different. He spent his first week as Sayuri's boss torn between keeping his distance in order to enforce his own rules on propriety, and dry humping the gorgeous woman. He could feel his composure on said decision crumbling. Cage-sama? Gaara nodded curtly, handed her a duty roster from his personal filing cabinet and returned to his office, settling in reluctantly. He pushed Sayuri out of his head. The newest batch of paperwork got a temperamental glare and growl from the cage. Some paperwork was just bullshit, so whenever the opportunity arose, he made sure to tell people he'd look into things he didn't actually have to. So Gaara's system was to sort things into one of three piles. Waste of parchment. This crap can wait, and do now or go insane later. He wasn't some shirker, but his time was far more valuable than the average shinobi. Even delegating less important documents for approval was a bitch. But he did it, and all with the patience of a saint as far as he was concerned. Since taking office, he'd gone over a number of the previous legislations, and there were a few that stood out more prominently than others as by laws that needed amending. This was his only political concern right now. The main one was the foundation of Suna's alliance with Konoha. He wasn't happy with it, and that problem wasn't going away. And with some of these newer revelations, he decided that trying to afford a new onsen house just to prevent Kankuro from peaking wasn't important enough to warrant the cage's attention. The puppet master was many things, but subtle was never one of them. Gaara found it funny, though he'd never admit it. Tamari had no idea both of her brothers found the idea of naked women in steam and hot water irresistibly hot. He was going to preserve her belief that he really was naive, despite his own personal experience, for as long as he could. Or as Kankuro told him, milk it for all it's worth. It made lazy weekends that much more bearable. Gaara sighed. Still, thoughts of Sayuri spending some quality time in the local onsen and tying Kankuro down so he couldn't ogle were delightful fantasies, and classified as beautiful, delicious distractions. Cage-sama. Gaara looked up, startled. None of this registered on his face however, and he merely nodded to his secretary. The object of his musings strode into his office and handed over a manila folder with Counselor Shin's seal on the cover. Looking Sayuri over, he realized he'd been doing paperwork for hours and he attempted a small smile in gratitude for her interruption. She returned the smile. Yoshiko-san said that Shin-san wants that done as soon as possible. So much for his happy mood. Sayuri, he sighed. Thank you, that's all. She nodded, bowed, and left, closing the door behind her. Gaara placed the manila folder down gently, staring at the door his secretary had just disappeared behind. The sound of his brother ambling into the hallway made up his mind on what to do next. He summoned his third eye and peeked through the wall as the puppet master grinned cheekily at Sayuri. Working hard? Kankuro asked. Sakura was just considering going for a self-directed tour to calm her nerves when the brunette interrupted her thoughts. He wasn't like Gaara, who despite his silent forwardness, didn't seem to know how to approach her. The last time she'd seen the puppet master before this mission, he hadn't been quite so happy. She shrugged. For now. You heading out to the clubs tonight? Sure, I like the Zephyr. Kankuro grinned, but didn't stop to talk any longer, heading toward the closed door to his brother's office. I'll see you there, he said, winking at her. Without knocking, he waltzed into his brother's office, knowing full well Gaara had been using his third eye to listen in on that short but sweet conversation. Friday nights were the busiest when Gaara got stuck into his paperwork. But after overhearing that Sayuri would be at the Zephyr, the most notorious nightclub in Suna that didn't literally reek, made him want to finish early. With a knowing smirk, Kankuro gave him a quick rundown on the sort of attire that was expected of him, and Gaara silently left his brother behind, knowing he'd be expecting to accompany him if only to have front row seats to what it was that his cage was planning. Gaara wasn't planning anything. He was moving on instinct, that Chunin he'd trained when she was still a genin, stood outside the Zephyr, amidst half a dozen other girls. The brunette squealed at the sight of him. He nodded curtly to Matsuri out of obligation but continued on without pausing. After a moment's hesitation, she followed. Tamari and Konkuro's sudden appearance kept her at bay however, and after scanning the nightclub quickly, Gaara realized Sayuri was already here. She was sitting on a love seat with that new Anbu, Shuin. Gaara remembered his code name was Bassett. He had a thing for overstepping his mark. Gaara took a seat, ignoring the passing waitress's attempts to offer him a beverage and, whatever your heart desires, Cage-sama, and pretended his siblings weren't stealing curious glances at him. Sayuri was the only thing he cared about right now. He stared blatantly and unabashedly. She looked up at him, her fingers clasping yet another glass of whatever it was she was having. He couldn't tell and right now, didn't care. She focused on him for a moment before turning back to the Anbu next to her. Gaara continued to stare at her after she pulled her eyes away and felt like going over there, pulling Shuin away from the girl and taking her to his mansion. But that little voice in his head, the one subliminally implanted there by Tamari over the course of his tenure as Cage, wanted him to be smart about this and not make a scene that would send the Suna grapevine reeling. So, he just sat there and watched, forcibly keeping his sand under control, and calming himself with mental images of himself killing that Anbu, slowly and painfully. For both of their sakes, Bassett was going to go on a long-term mission come morning and stay as far away from Sayuri as humanly possible once he returned. These thoughts kept his murderous ones at bay. Eventually, Sayuri lifted her eyes to return the stare of the Cage again and bit her bottom lip. The effect was instantaneous and his eye twitched involuntarily. Fucking hell, was she doing this on purpose? His question was answered when she got up, strode over to the low-set stage. Konkuro had spoken of it often in his tales of lap dances, pole dancers and horny one-night stands. And the Cage struggled to suppress his own physical reactions when his dark-haired receptionist swung her leg around one of the poles, her seductive movements amplified by the skimpy dress she'd chosen to wear. He wondered what she'd feel like, pressed up against him, dancing like that, how her intricately woven scent would change when intermingled with perspiration. The not-so-subtle, "come hither," motions of the male members of the crowd had Gaara growling audibly. Luckily, no one heard him. And then Sayuri invited Shuin to dance with her, and it was all Gaara could do not to encase the man in his sand coffin then and there. There were so many ways Shuin could die and no one would find a trace of him. He was vaguely aware that his siblings were talking about him. All he heard was, "make him jealous, get laid," and "oddly colored hair." That last statement drew his attention, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from the seductive, dancing form of his personal assistant. Every inch of her, and every not-so-innocent sway of her hips made him dig even deeper into the arm of his chair. Time passed, Sayuri didn't attempt to sneak upstairs with Shuin, and Gaara managed to relax his muscles enough to release his death grip on his chair. It would not do to have the Cage throw himself at some woman in the middle of a very public mix of estrogen and testosterone. He repeated this several more times in his head before standing up, casting a frustratingly hungry look at the object of said frustrations, and left the club. But he wasn't going home, oh no. He was going to make sure Sayuri went home, alone. Gaara was a master at moving undetected, and hovered around the entrance to the Zephyr, just waiting. She appeared 10 minutes later, and he managed to reform from the dispersal of his sand in time to literally bump into his brother. The puppet master had a look of absolute glee on his face, a half-wasted blonde woman hugging his side, and he chuckled, noting his Otouto's gaze follow the mysterious dark-haired woman from the land of iron. "Go get her," Konkuro whispered hoarsely, before gently pushing Gaara forward. Tamari had just exited the club, alone, and, knowing he was about to get reprimanded again, Gaara took his brother's advice. He had no intention of following Sayuri into her apartment and climbing into bed with her. The temptation was there, but he was well aware of what lines not to cross. He had already decided just to make sure she was going home alone, before returning to his own bed. She didn't see him, of course, and he watched her move into her bathroom for a few minutes before coming out and getting dressed in full view of the barely open window. Gaara didn't really consider himself a peeping Tom, despite several incidents in the local onsen. But this was bordering on it. Okay, This was yet another line he knew not to cross, but he was doing it anyway. Thankfully, for Sayuri's sake, and his own conscience, she didn't strip down completely. Her underwear was dark pink, lacy, and while enticing, still covered her nicely enough. She turned away from the window, slipped her bra off, and pulled on a faded shirt and the shortest boy shorts he'd ever seen. Gaara realized after the fact that his own hand had found the front of his pants and mentally berated himself. That could wait until he got home. He watched Sayuri as she settled into her bed, his eyes peering through the now near darkness resolutely until his own need for sleep drove him home. I'm going to hell for this. Monday morning had come too quickly. Gaara decided the best thing to do would be to ignore Sayuri until he decided whether it was worth ruining having a decent personal assistant over getting laid by said assistant. It wasn't like he'd have problems finding someone to warm his bed, so he didn't need her, specifically. But he knew it was just an excuse. She deliberately flirted with Shuan, given him more than a few seductive glances, and, well, let's just say, his hand had been busy for quite a while before he finally managed to get to sleep, both Friday and Saturday nights. He remembered the first time he'd masturbated. He had been so naive when it came to hormones and etiquette, not waiting to get home to do so. Kankuro had teased him for months about being so obvious in public, while Tamari refused to look him in the eyes for just as long. It wasn't like he'd done it to give people a show, he just didn't realize, lost so in his reverie, that he had an audience. Unfortunately, there were a number of fangirls nearby, and he still hadn't lived that day down. Only the threat of death in the most painful way possible kept every eyewitness publicly silent. Gaara sighed, opening his office door, having sensed the familiar chakra signature inside. What are you doing? He grumbled. Swiveling on your chair, Kankuro said gleefully, spinning several times before continuing. I like it, it almost makes me wish I were Case Cage. Almost. Kankuro nodded and held his right hand up for inspection, his forefinger and thumb a hair's breadth apart. Almost, he stressed, and then chuckled. And then I remember I hate overbearing old geezers. They suck all the fun out of life. Gaara nodded. Out. Kankuro complied, jumping out of the chair, but moved in front of the desk as his brother lazily sat back in it, looking more contemplative than usual. So, what's she like? Gaara looked up at him, frowning. You know what I mean. Kankuro grinned. Wet, and tight, what? Kankuro? Oh, you didn't get any, huh? The puppet master ignored his brother's murderous glare. Come on, oh Tuto, you can tell me. Yes, Gaara groaned, and then all of Suna would know. That hurts bro. Kankuro cocked his head to the side as he sensed Sayuri's approach, down the hallway. Well, gotta go. He sunshined out. Annoyed, Gaara watched again, with his third eye, as his brother conversed easily with Sayuri. He had spoken with her on many occasions, on both professional matters, and that one time she tried to ask him about his family life. She was easygoing, answering his unspoken question of, what about your family? And telling him all about her overprotective brother. He sounded like a male version of Tamari. And because he was an accomplished samurai, Gaara decided not to do anything to piss him off, at least until he gauged the man's level of creepy. Sayuri's laughter drifted through the wall at something Kankuro said and Gaara sighed wistfully. She was dressed conservatively as usual and accompanied by the rush of jealousy at her performance at the Zephyr. Gaara was suddenly very angry. She waltzed around the office in clothes of appropriate length and design and partied in a disreputable nightclub like she was just as loose as the other woman who spent their off hours there. But Sayuri was different to them again, beyond the obvious and underneath those clothes. He wanted to see for himself if she really was a porcelain doll, from head to toe, without the impediment of skimpy dresses or delectable lingerie. The possibility of luring her back to his place had him licking his lips. He had spent the week watching her with his third eye so often that it was bordering on insanity. She had him physically cornered, metaphorically speaking, and she was going to pay for that. Gaara almost didn't notice when his sister appeared and Kankuro left reluctantly. He was thinking about that lacy pink lingerie. He stood up, moved to the door of his office and surprisingly, even Tamari didn't notice as he inched it open. Tamari bowed her head slightly, her face now strangely expressionless, and her voice came out in a monotone whisper. I know who you really are. Sakura inhaled sharply. And who am I? A liar, the blonde said, smiling sweetly. Of this, she was sure. Your dossier says you're from Sakata, but not why you came here. Why did you even come to Suna? Sakura didn't know how to respond. But the best defense was an offense, so she threw the accusation back at the woman. Do you do this to every woman who just happens to stumble into the cage's life? No, she doesn't, Gaara said. He'd been standing in the doorway to his office and, thoroughly embarrassed. Sakura sat back in her chair, her eyes drifting toward her lap. Tamari shared a pouting glare with her brother and then promptly left by his silent command. Gaara moved away from his office and toward Sakura, staring at her intently. He leant forward, resting his hands on the arms of her chair and effectively caging her in. The corner of his mouth twitched when she determinedly matched his shameless gaze. He sniffed her again, like he'd been doing off and on for the last week. There was that curious cocktail that was her scent, again. Tamari only gets this defensive without attacking with women I have every intention of sleeping with. Sakura felt a chill run through her body, but she couldn't look away from him. He was smirking and leaning in toward her, without touching her. She licked her lips, and his eyes drifted to her lips, before running over her body. You were such a tease the other night, he said. And I don't like to be teased, not when I'm not the one pressed up against you, or deep inside you. Before she could utter a complaint, Gaara pulled her out of the chair and shoved her into the wall. Nothing broken, nothing fractured, a slight stinging sensation was the only evidence that he hadn't been gentle. And then he was kissing her, biting on her lips to make her gasp before his tongue invaded her mouth. He growled against her lips, and Gaara smirked triumphantly when the dark-haired girl responded to him vivaciously. He ground his hips, pushing her harder against the wall and using his body to cage her against it. All inhibitions had officially evaporated. Gods, she wanted him. He tantalized her senses, his expert tongue probing every inch of her mouth as his hands traced her body. She shivered and moaned out his name, then he did the same. Sayuri? Sakura stopped what she was doing, stunned. It wasn't the first time he'd called her by her fake persona, but this time it was laced with his desire. This was flipping her out, and she couldn't help the painful stab of guilt that tore through her heart. But he wouldn't let her remain idle for long, pulling her mind back into her physical predicament, and again, ground his hips into hers. A jolt of electricity, starting at her inner thigh, shot through her and she lost herself to his embrace once more. Neither of them forgot where they were, however, and eventually, their need to breathe took precedence. Gaara was the one to break the kiss, but not the contact. Go home, he said after a moment, still panting slightly. He smirked at the shock on her face. Take the rest of the day off. He pulled away from her. I'll be going home around sunset, and I expect you to be there. He shunshined out, leaving her dazed, and Sakura let out a breath she didn't remember inhaling. Holy fuck, this was really happening. Sakura packed up her things and did what she was told, leaving the administration building way too early. He was so much more intense than she'd anticipated, though the direct, I get what I want, attitude wasn't surprising, considering he was a cage. She found the apartment she shared with Tenzo empty when she finally managed to find it in her post-makeout days. As she sunk into a hot, relaxing bath, which was its purpose more than bathing, this time, Sakura closed her eyes, just remembering the feel of Gaara, the taste of him, and his scent. It was intoxicating, no, he was intoxicating. But she couldn't shake the guilt she'd felt at his use of her fake name. Come tonight, she was going to be taking advantage of him. On the battlefield, or in missions dealing with rogues and the usual scum, this was no problem. Attack, maim, kill, or cheat, it didn't matter. They had it coming, most of the time, and even when they didn't, she otherwise felt nothing for them. The guilt had left her a long time ago. She hadn't been a mere genin for years. Sakura had all day to wallow in what had happened, what was going to happen, and what it all meant. She had a sick, twisted feeling Gaara had done that on purpose. She had made a few friends since arriving, steering clear of the girls who had hearts in their eyes for their cage. She'd always had a natural talent for befriending someone regardless of age, nothing like Naruto's abilities of course, but it was similar in premise at least. She sighed, trying to think about the most constructive way she could be spending her unexpected day off. Her thoughts always inevitably returned to a certain hot redhead. Taking into account every rumor, every confirmation, mostly from Shikamaru, and every little ambiguous comment from Kankuro, Sakura found Gaara was mysterious, no matter which way she sliced it. When it came to him, she only knew 3 things for certain. He was the case cage, he definitely wanted to sleep with her, and he wasn't going to take no for an answer. She almost fell asleep. The heat of the bubbles, the aroma of her scented candles, the bathtub was also very comfortable. That in and of itself was a good enough reason to just stay in the water and wait for sleep to overtake her. She'd never felt comfortable lying back in a tub like this before. It wasn't luxurious, was barely large enough to accommodate her body, and was even chipped and faded. But Sakura could feel the urge just to drift away and let her worries over Gaara's indirect order to sleep with him fade. She had even closed her eyes. It wasn't so hard, his voice was pleasant but not demanding, in her head anyway. She almost fell asleep. Unbidden images of their imminent encounter plagued her. As much as it excited her, it also terrified. She'd worked herself up over it, and Sakura forced herself to calm down. It was always the image of herself throttling Naruto that helped. But she didn't blame him anymore, not really, she'd brought this on herself as well. She wanted this, more than anyone else knew. Gaara's fangirls may disgust her, mostly, she saw her former Sasuke fangirl self in them. But she did agree with the sentiment at least. And that was her concern. Sakura didn't want to lower herself to that anymore. She'd worked so hard to push away her inner, the voice that said what she couldn't had disappeared a long time ago, which was also made up of such foolish frivolity as stalking the cutest guy she could find. Naruto had gotten it right when he said attractive guys made her goofy. And there was no denying Gaara was attractive. Only an idiot couldn't see it. And to top things off, he knew it. He knew he was gorgeous, he knew she could see it, and it played across his face every time her gaze lingered on him longer than necessary. He was intolerable. Sakura remembered the first time she'd met him. The first time she'd taken the Chunin exams had been rough, not to mention she'd almost given up on the theory, her best subject. Naruto inspired her faith, whether she was raising her hand or following him blindly into the forest of death. A part of her longed for those days, considering Sasuke was still a member of Team 7 at the time, and no matter what he'd done since leaving Konoha, she missed him. She would always miss him. She would always love him. Gaara, however, had not immediately drawn her attention, as was to be expected considering she was still a Sasuke fangirl. But her inner noticed he was cute. He was definitely cute. Pictures of him and fleeting, long-distance shots of him over the years morphed him from cute to hot, but she hadn't quite been prepared for this mission. He'd grown up nicer and faster than she'd anticipated. And when Naruto was named Hokage, Sakura was on a mission. She had been at the inauguration, but not at the preceding negotiations with their existing allies. This was how she hadn't realized until it was too late that the new case cage was none other than her previous crush. And now, I'm panicking, she thought, rubbing her hands over her skin roughly. I just need to look at this logically. If she could push aside the thoughts that led to her nerves, it would be fine. She wasn't some trembling, naive virgin. This was a mission, there was nothing to it. She groaned. Except it's not really. Sayuri? She sat up quickly, water cascading over the side of the tub, knocking her candles into the tub and making her squeal in surprise. That was Tenzu's voice, and he sounded concerned. In the bath, she called out, knowing he would sit and wait like an impatient Aniki for her to hurry up and finish. Sakura had already cleaned, shaved, and cleaned some more, so there really was no need to stay in the bath. She'd divested herself of any traces of pink before even arriving in Suna, but it wouldn't hurt to be safe. When Sakura had a bathrobe around her body, she'd towel-dried her hair, walking lazily into the living room. There was a package on the coffee table, addressed to her, and she fingered it thoughtfully as Tenzo emerged from his bedroom. He looked wary. It's from the case cage, he said. Sakura nodded, unwrapping it carefully as she moved toward her bedroom. Tenzo followed but stopped at the doorway. Sakura sat down on her bed and read the instructions written on the sheet of paper. The package also came with a key and keychain. Was it to the case cage's mansion? She looked up at her brother. Why are you here? I thought you'd be at the dojo for another few hours yet. I heard he told you to go home and I was worried, he said. She gave him a half-hearted, nervous smile. He did. What happened? Sakura swallowed heavily, pulling herself to full height. The strong Kunoichi answered him. I'm going over to his mansion tonight. To sneak around or get laid? She turned a violent red and glared at him. I was invited, you lecherous pervert. Seriously, he was turning into Kakashi. She didn't remember him acting this way back when they were a part of Team Kakashi. What the hell was the matter with him? Sakura continued to glare at him, but he just matched it with a cheeky smile. He waited for her to calm down, and she thought it through, realizing he might not have felt comfortable talking like this to her or Naruto because they were underage back then. Are you always like this? She had been overage for years, thank you very much. No, he admitted, just when I'm really happy. She shook her head. I have enough to worry about without you going off the deep end. Mission troubles? More like nerves. Tenzo watched her closely as she flopped back onto her bed. You should calm down. Sakura glared at him. You calm down. I'm freaking out. He really wanted to give her his infamous glare, and make her calm down, but it really didn't affect her like it did Naruto. Those were the days. You're a Junin, he said instead. Not a genin, and this is just another mission. Sakura groaned, sitting up again. It's not just another mission, it's a seduction mission. I never took those for a reason. This isn't my thing. Then why did you accept this one? She looked up at him, still standing in her doorway. He looked familiarly comfortable between the wooden frames. The truth was that the idea of seducing Gaara had allowed her to forget her promise to herself when Tsunade had offered her seduction training. It wasn't like every kunoichi from here to the land of tea went through said training, as it was only an Anbu thing. With very few exceptions, and ultimately interchangeable via the order of a cage. She hadn't really thought this one through. She played with a strand of her hair, visualizing the pink tresses she preferred, through the black, not sure how to respond. You're just getting cold feet. She snorted. I'm sleeping with him, not marrying him. But why? She hesitated. If I tell you, you have to promise not to tell anyone, not even Naruto. I can't disobey a direct order from my Hokage, Sakura. Okay fine, unless he specifically asks you. Tenzo nodded. Promise. She gripped the bed sheets, desperately wishing she could access her chakra as she lowered her eyes to the floor. But even though it was safe enough for them to talk like this right now, she would not risk activating her chakra, call her paranoid. Tracker ninja scared the hell out of her, and Suna had a number of really good ones. It's stupid, she said. I always thought he was hot, and even daydreamed about having with him. She lifted her eyes quickly, catching the strange look of surprise on Tenzu's face before he managed to school his features. Don't tell anyone, that's it? Yeah? Tenzo just shook his head. It's just a fantasy, Sakura. Everyone has them. I know, it's just, well, now that I'm here, it's so much more embarrassing. It's just you and me here, he said, coming in to sit next to her. And I'm not Ino. I know how to keep a secret. Thanks. The wood master rubbed his forehead. But if you go in and see him with the bundle of nerves you've got going on right now, he's bound to wonder what's going on with you, even if you actually should be intimidated, because he's the case cage. What do you suggest? I know the fundamental steps of seduction. Why didn't you say so? He smirked. You didn't ask. Sakura was gobsmacked. Does that mean you've, Tenzo nodded. I've gone on seduction missions before, when I was Anbu. I can teach you a few things, if you really want me to. He'd left it to her to ask because he knew Sakura. No amount of offers would have gotten her to listen to him until she was desperate enough. This was a bit last minute, but the most important thing about this kind of mission wasn't the theory, though he would never belittle its significance, but the practical. If Sakura attempted to seduce the case cage given the set of instructions set down by Anbu, she'd fail. It was something all Anbu entering this type of mission learnt the hard way, and it was done to them on purpose. Gaara may have initiated their imminent encounter, but Sakura was a willing participant, and she needed to get a hold of herself. Okay, he said, standing up and offering his hand. She accepted it gratefully. You're officially inducted into the Tenzo School of Seduction. Sakura scoffed. Can I design my own curriculum? Sorry, that's a sensei's privilege. You suck as a teacher. Worse than Kakashi? She stuck out her tongue and he chuckled. Careful now, Sakura, he warned. We only have a few hours, and disrespect will not be tolerated. It wasn't until Tenzo had left her to get dressed that Sakura started to feel nervous again. The rules were simple in theory, and she just needed to hold on to that. Gaara had told her, via the letter with the key, not to dress up, but she wanted to at least look decent. Slutty and respectable didn't exactly go hand in hand, so she found a medium in a knee-high red dress, thinking it looked alright with minimal makeup. She also went halfway in recreating what she'd done the nights Gaara had followed her home after her fun in that nightclub, the Zephyr. Tenzo whistled at the sight of her, and she blushed. Shut up. He couldn't resist it. This was bringing out his cheeky side. Tenzo slapped her on the ass and grinned when she glared back at him. Go get him, tiger. This was ridiculous. She was standing outside the Cage's mansion, positive he was indeed inside, and she was freezing. He had to know she was out here, which pissed her off, because for the infinitesimal moments in which she'd risked activating her chakra to check, he hadn't moved from a room upstairs. Be it his bedroom or home office, she didn't know. Perhaps he was making her wait, but he had no way of knowing she'd know for sure he was up there. The note had specifically told her to wait, and she wondered what the key was for. Was he trying to piss her off or come off romantic? She wasn't sure at this point. You didn't need to dress up. Gaara's deep, husky voice tickled the back of her neck, startling her. She wasn't sure what that meant for her ninja senses, considering she wasn't supposed to have any right now, but as his lips grazed her skin, all other thoughts abruptly left her head. A hand slid down her side, not groping her, but not keeping a respectful distance either. I wasn't going to wear my track pants and halter top, she said quickly. She supposed he saw her point. It doesn't matter anyway, I'll be taking it off of you soon enough. Sand swirled around her, pulling her back against the chiseled form behind her, and Sakura felt her body being pulled through a teleportation jutsu. It didn't feel like a normal one, however, and she supposed this sand version worked on a slightly different premise. They landed inside the Cage's mansion and Gaara immediately released his hold on her. She spun around, taking a step away from him, eyes widening at the darkened, lustful stare of her imminent lover. What do you want? She asked, as though it wasn't already obvious. What words can never describe, he said, watching the array of emotions flitting over her face. He hadn't intended this to be anything other than a night of unbridled passion, but he was getting the idea, looking at her now, that she wasn't completely aware of the shallowness of his intent. Cage-sama, Her protests were cut off as he closed the distance between them, intent on showing her just how much he wanted her. The next instant, he had her on his bed, her thighs parted but not exposed, and his hands roaming her body. It was a few minutes of tugging and pushing later, when Sakura finally managed to regain her equilibrium and pull away. He was already running his hands under her dress in an attempt to divest her of her clothes, but she shifted her hips, clamping her elbows to her sides, to impede him. And, instead of allowing him access, his silent glare demanded as much. She smirked up at him. What, no entree? She was referring to his haste to undress her, and he knew it. What do you want? He murmured, echoing her earlier words. What are you expecting from tonight? A good fucking roll. Sakura almost balked at her own thoughts. The truth that she couldn't be honest about her answer was painful, so she instead redirected his line of questioning. I'm not looking at tomorrow, Sakura said, running her fingers along Gaara's arm. I'm looking at here and now, at you. He growled, taking that as some sort of acquiesce and returned to kissing her. Sakura tried not to look like she was terrified inside. She had no delusions that this was just he was after, and the idea of sleeping with the Cage and then leaving once her mission was over felt wrong. The way he looked at her was so intense. She daydreamed that it wasn't just lust. His eyes would rake her body, but only once he'd smiled and greeted her, all a while, his eyes were on hers. He would be infatuated. She was insane. Sakura was a Konohaku no Ichi, and she'd been trained to put the mission first, but this was still wrong. Sayuri, Gaara whispered huskily. Sakura trembled slightly at the sound of the fake name. The guilt was heavy now, and she closed her eyes as he licked her collarbone, biting her the next second, making her eyes snap open in shock. His arms snaked around her body and he growled into her skin, his hands returning to the task of undressing her. She helped him along, shifting underneath him and becoming less self-conscious by the second. So, he was finally seeing her naked. She would be in his position in a moment anyway. And as she thought that, Gaara pulled away to disrobe. His cage clothes fell away and without thinking, Sakura lowered her hands to the last of the impediments, pushing them down and releasing him from the bonds. She wasn't given a chance to admire him. Gaara lowered himself onto her, nibbling her, breaking skin. The entire length of her body was on fire from the contact as he moved against her. The friction increased, and he had her practically begging him to slide inside her. But he wanted to make it last, the delight with which he found himself teasing her, not something he was eager to cut short. Still, she couldn't seem to let go of the guilt. You're too fucking hot for your own good. Shit. Sakura inhaled deeply. Nothing. He frowned. Don't lie. Something's wrong. Now tell me what it is. She shuddered. Tenzu's warnings about hiding her emotions rang in her ears. She closed her eyes momentarily, trying to steel herself, and then looked at him. Gaara's expression had morphed, from slightly annoyed to concerned. He held his hovering hand down on her bare skin now, and she knew what he was about to say before he said it. Do you want me to stop? Sakura shook her head without thinking. And really, she didn't want him to back out of this. If she could push aside her guilt, pretend that he was about to have with Sakura Haruno, not Sayuri Nakayama, then everything else was bound to fall into place. Yes, she wanted this. I'm fine, she said, this time sounding like she meant it. It's just a little faster than I'm used to. She ignored the slight smirk on his lips. Everything up until. Sakura nodded. It's okay, I want this, I promise. His expression softened and Gaara released his hold on her, sliding up her body to place a kiss on her lips. He was waiting for her to relax, stroking her gently, and suckling on her bottom lip. He bit down when she bucked underneath him. And then Gaara slid his fingers inside her. Sakura was shocked at the strangely familiar sensation of chakra coursing through her. It streamed through her cervix, ending in her uterus. She could feel it like an extension of Gaara's fingers, and it was incredibly erotic. Was this a type of birth control jutsu? The medic in her wanted to ask him, but when she opened her mouth to voice the words, all that came out was a low-toned, guttural moan. Her body reacted without her permission, and in her reverie, Sakura did not see the arrogant smirk on Gaara's face. Watching her writhe under him was more than enough to make him hard, and then she had to go and mule in response to his chakra inside of her. It was interesting. He'd always been good at pleasuring women, but never had this kind of reaction before. She made him want to keep teasing her, to see how much she could take, but forcing his chakra into her was enough. There would be no unplanned repercussions from this night, and that was what was important. She could see that he was letting her in, letting down his guard, closing his eyes to his training, and as he pressed their foreheads together, Sakura was sure his eyes had changed. They were no longer the taut, reserved eyes of the case cage. Now he looked down at her with something akin to admiration, lust, and serenity. They questioned her silently and she nodded her assent, knowing this was her last chance to back out. She wanted him in her, now. And with one deep, angled thrust, he was suddenly inside her. The rest of the world disappeared. Sakura arched, jerking uncontrollably as she lost herself to the pleasure racking her body. He moved immediately, nuzzling her neck, inhaling her scent, and his hips rolled gently. His rhythm was demanding but coaxing and designed to arouse in agonizing leisureliness. Only when Sakura dug her nails into his back and drew blood did Gaara increase his pace. His eyes were rolled up into the back of his head and Gaara seemed lost to everything but what he was feeling. His hands unconsciously swept over her torso, mechanically memorizing the contours of her body, and he barely registered that the woman beneath him was half screaming in time with his thrusts. Sakura pulled the case cage closer to her heartbeat, trying to draw this out, excited and enlivened that his heart was racing just as quickly, but wanting to forestall the inexorable conclusion. And when her vision did inevitably explode, she was vaguely aware of her peripherals. His sand was everywhere. It swarmed around them like it had a mind of its own, exploding a moment later as Sakura threw her head back, letting out an ear-piercing, high-pitched scream. The case cage came inside of her as an afterthought and collapsed on top of her, his hot breath in her ear as they both drifted off. Sakura woke first. There was no light dazzling her eyes, like she'd have anticipated. The sun had yet to rise. It was still dark outside, and the inside of the case cage's mansion mirrored this. Without looking at the clock, she figured it was just after 2 in the morning. She'd never felt more exhausted, her body tingling with the sensation, but she also felt like she was standing naked in front of an air conditioning unit. Every pore was highly sensitized, every inch of her skin on alert. She'd never woken up quite like this before. She shifted her head slightly, realizing at the same time that Gaara's arm, while draped across her body, was relaxed and therefore easy to wriggle out of. She moved slightly however, and his fingers clenched, gripping tightly to her side. His eyes twitched. Even when fast asleep he was controlling. She fidgeted, maneuvering until his arms fell lax at his sides, and Sakura wiggled out of bed. Glancing at the naked case cage, she looked around the room again. During the course of their fun, She'd vaguely registered that this room contained a safe. For a ninja, such a device would have Jutsu all over it, so she wouldn't be able to open it without activating her chakra and therefore alerting the sleeping form of the cage. But she just wanted to examine it. Her clothes were flung around the room carelessly, and getting dressed again would look suspicious if you were to wake up before she was done. So Sakura made her way over to the safe in the near darkness, completely naked. She was right about the array of Jutsu. Sakura knelt in front of it, tested the more obvious seals, and made a visual inspection of the lock. If she had 5 minutes of privacy, she was sure she'd get it open, 10 minutes without making any kind of mess. She looked up quickly at the sound of feet shuffling along. Outside, in the hallway, someone was coming this way. A ninja's first instinct was supposed to be to attack, defend, or retreat. The possibility that someone might walk in on her trying to steal cage secrets, not that that was exactly what she was doing, made her want to lash out. The footsteps didn't pass the room by. In fact, whoever was encroaching in on the cage's room at this ungodly hour was slowly opening the door without knocking and, naked and kneeling down in front of the locked safe. All Sakura could do was hold her breath and resist the temptation to activate her chakra. That's all for now. If you enjoyed, then please like, share and do comments.